I'll never forget the security camera footage. Cherry blossom petals falling on that spring morning, and a white gorilla approaching an elderly woman in a wheelchair. No technology could truly explain what happened next. It was more than just animal behavior. It was proof that love knows no boundaries, that memory is incredibly powerful. It was the purest form of goodbye I've ever witnessed. This white gorilla, Kesi, had been genetically modified, a product of tampering for profit. Yet, years later, he recognized his former caretaker and sought her out, even overcoming security maze. How could he remember something he learned so long ago? How could he be so gentle, despite his immense strength? And how could he form such a deep attachment to a human? The answers lie in a story of a bond that even science struggles to explain. It all began with Emma Carter, who had dedicated 42 years of her life to working with primates. But nothing was as pivotal as the night she raided that laboratory. It was 2006, and controversial experiments in genetic engineering were gaining momentum. Emma, working for an animal rights organization, had been watching a suspicious laboratory for months. That night, she finally managed to get inside, and the sight that greeted her shook her to her core. In a small cage, in the middle of a cold, sterile room, lay a gorilla infant with fur as white as snow. The other gorillas were dark-colored, natural-looking. This infant defied nature, covered in perfect whiteness. Looking at the files, Emma learned the truth. This was one of the first genetically modified gorilla infants. It wasn't albinism, but the result of deliberate intervention. Scientists had tampered with its genetics, perhaps to sell it to wealthy collectors. But this tiny being was living without a mother, without love, only as an experimental object. I can only imagine what Emma must have felt. Something broke in her heart. She couldn't leave him there. Risking her career, her freedom, perhaps even her life, she took Kesi out of there. She named him Kesi, meaning hope in an ancient language. He was hope for Emma, proof that humanity could still do good, that love was stronger than science. The first days were difficult. Kesi was traumatized, crying through the nights, trembling in Emma's arms. But Emma didn't give up. She fed him, sang lullabies, slowly gaining his trust. As months passed, the bond between them grew stronger. As Kesi grew, his white fur shone even brighter. His intelligence, his empathy, his loving gaze amazed everyone. It was as if he was receiving back all the love he had lost in that laboratory, multiplied. By the time he was 3, Kesi was too big to climb on Emma's shoulder. But he still came to her side every morning, resting his huge head on her knees, waiting for her hands to wander through his fur. This ritual was sacred for Emma, a silent conversation they both shared. She taught Kesi simple things: how to peel fruit, how to play games, even how to open a simple lock. She showed him this last skill as a fun activity, a metal lock with buttons turned in the right sequence. But actually, it was one of the most important gifts Emma had given him: the ability to understand the idea of freedom. Years passed. When Kesi turned 10, he was already over 200 kgs. His white fur glowed in the sunlight. His amber eyes carried deep wisdom. Emma could no longer keep him at home. It would be dangerous. But the solution she found was the best for him. The local rehabilitation center agreed to accept Kesi. It was a professional facility designed for injured animals in need of protection, with large areas. Kesi would be safe there, cared for by experts, and able to move freely. The day she took him there, Emma felt something tear inside her. Kesi looked at her, an understanding in those big eyes, as if he knew she thought this was best for him. As she left him, Emma stroked his head one last time, whispered in his ear, "I will always love you, Kesi. You're my son." And Kesi touched Emma's face, those giant fingers touching hers, as if making a promise that he would never forget her. After that day, Emma visited him every week. She couldn't make direct contact, but just watching him from behind the bars was enough. Every time Kesi saw her, he would stand up, place his hands on the bars, and look at her. It was as if he was speaking, saying, "Mom, you're here." Everything is. Time was merciless, especially toward Emma. When she reached 65, the doctors gave her a diagnosis that echoed like a death sentence: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or motor neuron disease. It was merciless, progressive. I can only imagine the feeling of being trapped within your own body, as it slowly betrays you. To have your mind remain sharp, your feelings deep, but to be unable to express them, that must have been the most painful thing. Within a year, Emma could no longer walk. She was confined to a wheelchair. Her speech became difficult. Even forming words required monumental effort. Visiting Kesi became impossible. Her health simply wouldn't allow it. Months passed without seeing him, and the absence began to consume her. She knew her time was running out, and she desperately wanted to see him one last time. Her sister Sarah, understanding the urgency, devised a plan. She contacted the rehabilitation center, secured special permission, and one spring morning, as cherry blossoms danced in the air, she wheeled Emma to the center. As they moved along the main path, people cast pitying glances, but Emma noticed none of it. Her entire focus was on one thing. In the distance, Kesi stood like a white giant in a large outdoor area. The spring sun warmed Emma's face. Cherry blossoms landed in her hair, but her only desire was to see her son. They stopped just before the bars. Kesi, his back turned, sat on a large rock. Emma tried to call out to him, but only rasping sounds emerged. Tears streamed down her face. To be so close, yet unable to reach him, was unbearable. Sarah touched her shoulder. "Let me call him," she offered softly. But then, as if by a miracle, Kesi turned his head. Perhaps he felt the vibration of her sounds, or perhaps it was instinct. But when his huge head turned, his amber eyes found Emma. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Their eyes locked, and all the noise of the world seemed to vanish. There was only the woman and the gorilla, mother and son, reunited after years. Kesi slowly rose. His massive body, over 200 kilograms, moved with a strange grace. Purpose filled each step as he walked toward the bars. He had seen her, and he remembered. Reaching the bars, he stopped, gripping the metal, his head bowed, his eyes fixed on Emma. Then he made a sound, deep and almost human, as if in pain. One of those characteristic sounds gorillas make when they're sad. Sarah brought the wheelchair closer, leaving only a meter between Kesi and Emma, the bars their only barrier. Emma tried to reach out with her trembling hand, but lacked the strength. Seeing this, Kesi extended his own giant hand through the bars. His fingers touched hers, sending a jolt of electricity through her. 10 years. She hadn't been able to fully touch him for 10 years. Now his warm, soft, familiar fingers intertwined with hers. Kesi's fingers began to tremble. Was he crying? Could gorillas cry? She didn't want to leave her sister alone with this giant animal. But seeing the determination in Emma's eyes, she slowly backed away. One of the security team members shouted, "No, get away from there. This is very dangerous." I've spent years studying animal behavior, but I've never witnessed anything like this. The director of the center, Dr. Alan Thompson, even said it himself. This is something even science can't explain. What happened wasn't just a woman and a gorilla. It was a universal bond, the bond between mother and child, a love that disregarded species, time, and distance. Sarah had told everyone to wait. Kesi was right in front of Emma, his giant shadow covering her. Sunlight broke on his white fur, creating a halo. Slowly, he crouched down until their faces were almost level. His giant hand reached out, and his fingers touched Emma's face, so gentle, so delicate, as if touching a child. He caressed her cheek, took a cherry blossom petal from her hair, examined it, then gently placed it on the ground. Then he rested his huge head on Emma's knees. Everyone froze. Security teams, visitors, center staff, no one even breathed. This wasn't just animal behavior. It was the meeting of two souls, a mother and son's farewell after years. Emma raised her trembling hand and put it on Kesi's head, feeling the warm, soft, familiar white fur between her fingers. Tears flowed, but it wasn't pain anymore. It was gratitude. Kesi kept his head on Emma's knees and made a strange, almost human-like whimpering, the sound gorillas make only in the deepest emotional moments, as if saying, "Mum, you're here. I missed you. I never forgot you." Words fell from Emma's mouth, difficult, choppy, but coming from her heart. "I love you, Kesi." Kesi lifted his head slightly and looked at her. There were no tears in those amber eyes, but there was understanding, acceptance, as if he knew. He knew Emma wouldn't be with him much longer. His giant hand reached for the wheelchair armrest and carefully examined the metal edges. Then he placed his hand on Emma's hand. Their hands joined under the sun, cherry blossoms falling around them. Emma realized Kesi was being careful not to hit the edge of the wheelchair. Every movement was calculated, controlled, because he knew Emma was fragile and he wanted to protect her. Minutes passed, undisturbed. The security teams lowered their weapons, seeing love, not a threat. Sarah was crying, and other visitors silently shed tears. Everyone understood this wasn't just a woman and a gorilla. Kesi slowly lifted his head, looked at Emma one last time, then brought his hand to her face, wiping the tears from her eyes with his finger. The movement was compassionate, protective, full of love, just like a human. Emma wanted to say one last thing, but words weren't enough. No words could express what she felt, but Kesi understood. He knew everything Emma wanted to tell him. "You are my son," she said, with her last strength. Kesi rested his huge head on Emma's knees again and stayed there. They both knew this wasn't a goodbye, but a moment of gratitude, giving thanks for the most beautiful gift life had given them each other. Cherry blossoms fell, pink petals landing on white fur, the sun shining on the wheelchair's metal surface. Everything was perfect. As the sun rose toward noon, Kesi was still by Emma's side, not wanting to leave. Dr. Thompson approached slowly, a basket of Kesi's favorite fruits in his hand. "Kesi," he said softly, "come on, buddy. Let Emma rest." Kesi lifted his head and looked at the doctor, then back to Emma. Hesitation filled his eyes, as if he knew that if he left her, he would never see her again. Perhaps he was right. Emma, gathering her last strength, gently pushed him away with her hand. "Go," she whispered. "Be well." Kesi placed his giant hand on Emma's hand one last time, held it tightly as if trying to transfer all the love coming from within him with that touch, then slowly stood up, his eyes still on her. He took a few steps back, then stopped, turned around, and looked at Emma one last time. In that look was everything: gratitude, love, farewell, and a silent promise that he would never forget her. Dr. Thompson slowly guided Kesi back inside the bars. Kesi wasn't interested in the fruits. He only looked back at Emma, turning his head to keep her in sight as he walked away. Sarah brought her news of Kesi, said he was doing well. But there was something Sarah didn't say, that Kesi came to the bars every evening at sunset and looked at the last place Emma had stood. 2 months later, Emma woke up one morning having trouble breathing. The disease had progressed. Sarah called the ambulance, but Emma refused. She didn't want to go to the hospital. She wanted to be at home in peace. That night, as she lay in her bed, she looked out the window. The moon was full, and white light filtered into the room. At that moment, a strange feeling overcame her, as if Kesi were beside her, as if that giant hand were touching hers again. She closed her eyes and imagined Kesi, his white fur, his amber eyes, his giant but gentle hands. She imagined that last day, that perfect day when cherry blossoms danced in the air, when the sun illuminated everything. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for letting me love you, Kesi." And that night, Emma fell asleep in peace. The next morning, Sarah couldn't wake her. Emma was gone, but there was a smile on her face, a peaceful, happy expression, as if she had seen a beautiful dream. When Dr. Thompson received the news, he cried. Emma had not only saved an animal's life, she had given him a loving, meaningful life. How would they tell Kesi? How do you tell a gorilla that the person he loved most has died? But Kesi already knew that morning. He hadn't come to the bars as usual. For the first time in days, he didn't break his morning routine. He just sat in the farthest corner of his area, head bowed, motionless, as if mourning. Dr. Thompson made a decision. He asked Sarah for Emma's favorite shawl, and one morning in the early hours, he left it in Kesi's area. When Kesi saw the shawl, he froze. He approached, smelled it, and at that moment, his giant body trembled. His hands grasped the shawl, brought it to his face, and smelled it for a long, long time. It was Emma's scent, lavender and daisy. Kesi had never forgotten that scent. He gently pressed the shawl to his chest and bowed his head. From that day on, Kesi slept with that shawl every night. In the morning, he would take it with him, protecting it as if it were a treasure. It was Kesi's way of maintaining his connection with Emma. Months passed. Kesi slowly returned to normal. He ate, he played, he lived. But every evening at sunset, he would take that shawl with him and come to the bars. He would sit there and wait. And perhaps, in a way, Emma was always there, in every cherry blossom petal, in every ray of sunlight. Emma was in Kesi's heart, just as Kesi was in Emma's heart. A year later, the Rehabilitation Centre erected a special monument in Emma's memory, made of white marble. It was a small but meaningful monument with a figure of a woman and a gorilla hand in hand. Underneath was an Indian. Emma Carter, 1964 to 2026. She taught that love knows no language, species, or barrier. On the day of the monument's unveiling, Sarah was there, and Kesi was there too, watching silently from behind the bars. When the ceremony ended, Sarah went to Kesi's side and looked at him. Those amber eyes gave Sarah a sad but grateful look. "You loved my sister very much, didn't you?" said Sarah, with tears in her eyes. Kesi bowed his head slightly, as if confirming. "She loved you very much too," said Sarah. "Know that." And Kesi, at that moment, made a strange sound, soft, sweet, sad, one of those rare sounds with which gorillas express their deepest feelings. Years passed. Kesi lived a long and happy life. Grey strands appeared among his white fur, but that sparkle in his eyes never disappeared, and he carried Emma's shawl with him until he died. One autumn morning, Kesi peacefully passed away. Veterinarians said his heart had stopped, but caretakers said something else. He finally went to be with Emma. They buried Kesi right next to Emma's monument and wrote on it, "Kesi, 2006 to 2023. He knew what love was, and he never forgot it." That night, the full moon illuminated both graves. Emma and Kesi, mother and son, two souls finally together again. And you could see cherry blossom petals dancing in the wind, even though it wasn't the season, as if Emma and Kesi were somehow still showing their love. I've always been moved by stories of deep, enduring connection. The kind where two souls seem destined to find each other. And the story I've been sharing is one of those. It speaks of two individuals whose lives intertwined in a way that, even across the centuries, resonates with a quiet power. They were together,